Welcome back, everyone. I am going to demonstrate just painting over the texture that we made in the last video. And I've got a couple different types of paint here. I have some acrylic on this palette, and then I also have a set of watercolors here. So I'm going to start with the acrylic, and then I'll show you what that looks like over all these textures. Then I'll switch to the watercolors and show you what that looks like. And then I will do a little bit of watercolor over the acrylic. So I did start a little bit of a sample here just a second ago, and I'm going to continue on here. So if you remember, this was the modeling paste, and as you can see, it's no longer wet, it's hardened, and we can go ahead and start painting over it. So I'm kind of just mixing some of these colors together. So I started with a little bit of red, and I'm using a pretty stiff paintbrush, but I really like the way that the paint kind of catches in, let's see, get this thing to focus. I really like the way that the paint catches in the texture. There we go. The way that the paint catches in the texture with the acrylic. So I'm gonna add a few more colors to it, so you can just kind of see I'm mixing right here on my canvas. A lot of times when I'm doing a background or something that doesn't need to be really precise, even if it does need to be precise, sometimes I'll just mix colors right on the canvas instead of mixing them in the palette. You could also water down the acrylic a little bit, so I just got a tiny bit of water on my paintbrush. And when I paint over this area, you can just see it's a little bit thinner. So it's a little thinner over there where I watered it down. And the more that you water it down, the more it will have sort of a transparent look to it. Okay, let's go ahead. Let's do watercolor on that same section. Okay, so I'm going to get some water on my brush. If you haven't used watercolor, basically the palette comes with these cakes, that's what we call these things, and they start out dry, and then you add a little bit of water to the cake that you want to use, and I'll do green for this one. So you can see that I have activated the paint and some green has come up on my brush. I'm gonna add a little bit more water since we're just starting it out. And then I can paint onto the texture here. Okay, so you can see the watercolor is definitely a lot thinner. It tends to pool in certain areas more than the acrylic does. And then it also looks very different on the canvas versus the modeling paste. I'll just mix one more color in there with it, clean off my brush in between colors, and we'll add a little blue to the green so we can get a little color variation. Okay, once this acrylic dries, then I will come back in and try some watercolor over the acrylic. But we'll just set that aside for now. Okay, next we are going to move on to the newspaper. So we did two different techniques with newspaper here. One was making it really crumply and like lots of kind of ridges in the newspaper, and then this one is a little bit more smooth and it's just raised off the canvas. So if you don't remember, you can kind of see the texture there and how thick that is. Okay, I'll do the same thing here. So you could paint over the newspaper and purposely not get in all those cracks and leave some white spaces. You could also try to work your way into all the crevices so that you don't see the newspaper anymore. And then one thing that I kind of like to do is to work the first color all the way into the newspaper and then take another color and kind of, might be a little too much paint, go over it and just get the edges. So you can kind of see how the purple and blue are not really mixed because I'm just going over the parts that are easily accessible with the blue. Okay, then on this one, it should go on really smoothly because there's not a lot of ridges. So. Now I am noticing that maybe it's just the purple, but this is not really covering up the colors of the newspaper very well. It still looks really thin, so there's two things you can do there. The best would be to put gesso down first. I just don't happen to have gesso with me right now. So gesso is a mixture of plaster and glue, or plaster and paint. Anyway, it's a base layer. It's this white stuff that's on the canvas, and it will make a nice white surface for you to start painting on. So you can use gesso before you do this, or you can just paint multiple layers until it covers better. Gesso is probably the faster route. Just try to fill in some of the space here. Okay, get a little light on that so you can see it. Okay, so that's painting over the newspaper with acrylic. I'm going to set that brush to the side and use my watercolor. Clean off that brush, and I'll just stick with the purple theme that we have going on over here and paint right onto the newspaper. Now, on this newspaper, I only put glue around the edges. I didn't put it over the entire thing. So the watercolor is really soaking into this top part here where there's no glue, but it's kind of just sitting on top of the glue down here and looks a little bit more watery towards the edges. Just something to note. So with the acrylic paint, it looks pretty even, but with the watercolor, there's a noticeable difference. I'm going to add just a little bit extra water. Try to make it more of a wash. Okay, and this side is all covered in glue, so I'm assuming it will kind of just run right off the newspaper. Yep, that's pretty much what it's doing. Okay, get up a little bit closer. So you can see on this side, it really soaked it up on the newspaper and it looks really dark. Out on the canvas and where the glue is, you can see the difference and it looks very thin. Then over here, it kind of just puddled into sort of the lowest point of the newspaper. And then we'll do the paper ones down here, the cardboard, sorry. And since I have watercolor out, I'll just go ahead and show you with watercolor. Let's start with, we'll do green again. So there is glue on top of this cardboard. So the watercolor is not really soaking in, it's kind of just sitting on top. Let's turn this around. It's kind of sitting on top and puddling. and it's kind of just like a thin stain layer. And then we'll do the same thing on the egg carton, which has also been covered with glue. We'll do blue over here. So it's also puddling on this one, but I think with the texture and just how bumpy the egg carton is, it actually looks really cool. Turn it so the light's on it. So I really like what it does on the egg carton. I would probably use that technique on my project. We'll do just a little bit more on here. And then I'm going to switch back to acrylic, and I'm just kind of use the same colors. So I know this is super messy. You won't have this many different textures all in one spot on your project, and this many types of paint and colors of paint all in one little area. But I just want to show you what you can do with each one. Let's start with red this time. Okay, so if I paint with the ridges, it fills, gotta turn this again. It pretty much just fills them in completely. And if I paint against the ridges, then you can see that it only paints the very top of them and leaves the it paints the mountains and it leaves the valleys. Okay, and we'll try that on top of here. So it's pretty well covering this, and it looks really even and covers really well, so that's good. I am also going to water down the acrylic just a little bit so that we can see what happens when it's watered down. So let me get a little paint off. Might have too much paint on my brush still. Okay. So if you water down the acrylic, it has a little bit of transparency. It just makes it a bit thinner, but it's still thicker than the watercolor. So this is the part that I just did, that blue part right there. So it's still a little thicker than the watercolor, but it's more transparent. On your projects, the first stage after you plan will be applying texture to your canvas, and then the second stage will be painting the canvas. And I want the whole thing painted with color. I don't want anything left blank. And then you can continue to add layers of paint and texture as you go throughout your project, but you do need to start with a full canvas of it. So please think through it a little bit more than this, but if you'd like to just pick a couple of colors and kind of mix them together on the canvas, paint them all around, that's a good way to go. I think the acrylic paint is dry enough for me to mix a little watercolor in on top of it, so let's try, I might go for some yellow, hopefully that doesn't backfire, just on top of the acrylic paint here. It's not doing a whole lot, but you can see there's sort of just a yellow glow to it. You can see that. So it kind of just catches in the ridges, adds a little like highlight to the paint. And then I will probably do a specific tutorial just on watercolors so that you can learn how to do washes and all of that stuff. So I'll do one more on here and then check out the other video if you want to learn more about watercolor. We'll do yellow again. So that's on the newspaper layer, and it has kind of a cool effect too. You can see it does really stand out on top of the blue and just kind of selectively puddles. Okay, so hopefully that helps you get an idea of what each material or what each paint will do on top of each textural material. And then you can also kind of experiment on your own canvas, and if you don't like it, you can just cover it with a different type of paint or another material until you're happy with it. Let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm going to finish this thing up and attempt to make it look decent. And then, yeah, I'll do another video for the watercolor and the acrylic. Alright, bye guys.